Good afternoon. Today we're going to start out talking about dialectical thinking or yin-yang type thinking. Systemic thinking could be said to be circular rather than linear, with reality coming back upon itself. Teilhard de Chardin sees the final version of this with God at the center of reality. In circular thinking, there are natural limits. Linear thinking is limitless, which would of course imply problems in the use of natural resources, etc., addictions and things like that. And this is what addiction is made of, limitlessness. Nonviolence in resistance is part of a more circular way of thinking. You could think of your opponent as at the other extreme of that circle. Gore describes traits which psychologists have found to be present in many of those who resisted during World War II. He describes them, and today other people who resist. And these go back to childhood training. So there are certain traits which people have when they are able to resist. Freedom and personhood, which played a big part in Martin Luther King's thinking, fit into resistance in that when someone gets up the courage to stand up and resist, he becomes quote-unquote somebody. He is expressing his freedom in this resistance. I'm sorry, I have to call you back. I'm on YouTube right now. I'll call you back. I'll call you back, Jean. Okay. Excuse me. These go back, where was I? Okay, so when someone gets up the courage to stand up and resist, he becomes somebody. He is expressing his freedom in this resistance. And what he is resisting is abuse to his freedom. So he's not addicted to abuse. He doesn't want to take it, and he lets them know, but it's always in a non-violent way. He might stand up, but he doesn't want to. His purpose is not doing harm to his opponent, but he'll stand up to whatever is being done that he wants to resist. The evolutionary step from the need for self-preservation to that of other preservation is found in the understanding of King, in his thinking. There is a dialectical irony in our dependence on the other, which reaches its extreme in our need for our enemy. So when we want other survival, that's an evolutionary step. Instead of just thinking of me, I'm going to survive, we're thinking they need to survive too, and they may even be an enemy. That's a big step forward. And it seems to be evolutionary because it's very unusual. This dialectic is a kind of reversal of the codependent relationship in which the opposition also is needed. So when they are not authentic needs, when the needs are inauthentic, there can be a codependency. And there you have what seem like opposition, but they're actually working together. Let's say someone is addicted to drinking and somebody else gets him his drink, and there's a codependency for some reason. That other person is addicted to something that has them getting the other person's drink. So there's a codependency. That is not the same thing as what resistance is, just the opposite. But there's it seems like a cooperation, but resistance is loving the enemy and resisting nonviolently so that the enemy is not hurt. And maybe the person actually has to receive some kind of a hurt, the person who's resisting. An example of the other type, the type where a person is cooperating, it's called codependent relationship, was the ironic need by the German Nazis of the cooperation of the populations in occupied territories. So those people, in a way, they were cooperating because they could have resisted and they didn't. So maybe they were part of the overall syndrome. The Nazis, for some reason, were holding them hostage, but they were cooperating because sometimes they could have easily resisted. Some of the victims could have easily resisted. They had very few Nazis watching them. They could have easily gotten together and said, okay, we've got 100 people here, let's overcome this person. Now, maybe some of them would have been hurt in the process, but that's part of resistance. You have to be willing to suffer in the process of your nonviolent resistance, and sometimes it's not effective. Physically effective, it's more on a spiritual level. Non-cooperative resistance by those populations who were dominated by the Nazis would have been the proper response, King's recommended response to the Nazi enemy. The nonviolence would show a deep respect for the enemy, and the resistance a deep respect for oneself. The value of good communication cannot be overestimated in the effort to avoid this collusion, which is when you have a codependency, nonviolently, while seeking other acceptable alternatives in order to avoid the necessity of total non-cooperation. On an international scale, John Burton emphasizes the importance of understanding well the point of view of the other country. So you might have a struggle going on between two countries. But there should be an effort to understand, why are you so upset with us? Instead of just saying, no, you're wrong and we're right, we should go and have some kind of communication. This tended to be better developed among countries without the capacity for manipulation by either war. Manipulation would be rewards and punishments, which might be war or loans or, rewards or punishments. Countries that were poor, they have to talk to each other. Whereas a rich country might be tempted to say, okay, do what we want, or we're going to stop giving you that loan that we've been giving you, that money that we always give you. We're going to stop giving it to you. If it's a rich country, they can try to use their money to manipulate other countries and try to get their way 100% instead of saying, well, you have needs too. What is it, what is it that's bothering you? Why are you so upset? Just the way you would hopefully talk to another person rather than come to blows or rather than manipulate each other. Now, George Bush had a contention that the Soviet Union discontinued their nuclear arms buildup. At a certain point, they discontinued it because of the threat of Star Wars from the United States. In other words, and this was what was known as peace through strength, which to me is a misnomer. But then after that, there is more manipulation. After the Soviets gave up or started lowering by a great amount their nuclear buildup, after they did that, they got a lot of loans after they changed over from their old ways. That was during the years of Gorbachev. They got a lot of loans in there, and that would be probably a continuation of the same type of bad communication. One, first they're being threatened by the United States huge amount of Star Wars and all that kind of stuff, and which is like punishment, big punishment. Okay, and then they're being given rewards, which would be the loans. So, and exactly how that worked, I don't know if it was from the international organizations that give out loans or if it was from the United States. I'm not sure where I got that idea, that I wrote that down at that time. So, but it would be a continuation of that same type of political thinking, which is based on the syndrome of rewards and punishments. And it would not be a freeing type of solution based on open communication with the opposition. That's what John Burton would suggest. It's called communication theory, where the countries talk to each other. They don't threaten each other. They talk. Okay. In regard to the dialectic, King wanted to reestablish the broken community. So this circle, the whole circle, should be friends, not have it cut off. That's the broken community. And the way he would reestablish it would be by seeking the cooperation of the opposition, who were, he thought, decent people whose sense of right and wrong had simply been allowed to fall asleep. He felt nonviolence, being the means and therefore part of the end, was necessary in order not to antagonize the opposition or hurt the end, which was a community at peace with itself. Thoreau touched on the eternal dimension of resistance to evil. He felt if only one man would resist the system of slavery at that time by giving up his co-partnership, his collusion, and suffer the consequences, this would bring about the downfall of the whole system of slavery. If one person would do that, well, he'd really suffer some consequences. But he would be suffering them in the name of all those people who died and were tortured and were hurt. He'd be doing it for a very spiritual reason. So it has an eternal dimension, this non-cooperation. The decision of whether to carry out nonviolent non-cooperation is one of conscience. It's not a question of expediency. Will it work? Will it be worth it? No. It's on a completely different level. It's eternal. George Catlin wrote about Gandhi. With him, cry out all those slain and suffocated and burned alive by the instruments of war or killed by tyrants whom we condoned, without any nonviolent or other resistance, in the concentration camps from Dachau to the Arctic. So when there's injustice, we need to resist. Otherwise, we're part of the syndrome. Nonviolent non-cooperation should not be taken up one time and left the next, but rather it's a moral necessity in certain circumstances. If it could be taken up or not, according to its probable results, it would just become one more instrument of manipulation, maybe, or other things that they try to work. This is somewhat in line with the spiritual preference in political thinking lately of over the material. There, about 20 years ago, people in political science started adding the spiritual dimension to political science. Gandhi contended that spirit came first, before matter.